The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in January, typed on that familiar cream-colored HOA letterhead that always made my stomach drop. And this time, it was about my heated bird bath of all things. I stared at it over my coffee, reading the words 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. My name is Quentin Keller, and I had lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Naperville, Illinois, for 5 years without any serious issues with the Homeowners Association. Sure, there had been the occasional reminder about lawn height or holiday decoration takedown dates, but nothing major. This letter, however, was different. Dear Mr. Keller, it began in that pseudo-formal tone that HOA President Patricia Brennan always used. It has come to our attention that you have installed an unauthorized decorative feature in your front yard, specifically a heated bird bath. According to Section 7.3 of the Meadowbrook Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, all exterior decorative installations must receive prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Furthermore, Section 12.8 prohibits any features that may attract excessive wildlife to the property, as this can create nuisances for neighboring residents. You have 15 days from the date of this letter to remove the bird bath or face fines of $100 per day until compliance is achieved. I set the letter down and looked out my kitchen window at the bird bath in question. It was a simple stone basin, about 3 feet tall, with a heating element that kept the water from freezing during the brutal Illinois winters. I had installed it in early December after watching a cardinal repeatedly try to drink from ice in various puddles around my yard. The bird bath cost me $200 at a local garden center, and in the 6 weeks since installation, it had become a hub of activity. Every morning, I watched from my window as cardinals, blue jays, finches, sparrows, and even the occasional woodpecker stopped by for a drink or a quick bath. The wildlife activity had increased noticeably, and I found it peaceful and educational. My girlfriend, Paula Osborne, who taught elementary school, had even brought her class by on a nature walk to observe the birds from a respectful distance. I grabbed my phone and called Paula. She answered on the second ring. "You are not going to believe this," I said, not bothering with a greeting. "What happened?" "The HOA wants me to remove my bird bath. They sent me a violation letter." There was a pause. "The heated one you just put in, that's the one." "Apparently it is unauthorized and attracts excessive wildlife." Paula laughed, but not in an amused way, more incredulous. "Excessive wildlife, Quentin, they are birds, cardinals and sparrows. It is not like you are feeding bears. Try telling that to Patricia Brennan." "Oh God, is she behind this?" "The letter has her signature." Paula sighed. I could picture her rubbing her temples the way she always did when dealing with bureaucratic nonsense. "What are you going to do?" "I honestly do not know. Part of me wants to fight it on principle." "I mean, it is a bird bath. How is that hurting anyone? You should talk to your neighbors first. Get a feel for whether anyone actually complained or if Patricia is just being Patricia." It was good advice. I finished my coffee, bundled up against the January cold, and decided to start with my immediate neighbors. To my right lived the Johnsons, a retired couple in their 70s. To my left were the Patels, a young family with 2 kids under 5. Martha Johnson answered her door wearing a thick cardigan and holding a pair of binoculars. "Quentin, perfect timing. I was just watching a gorgeous female cardinal at your bird bath. Come in, it is freezing out there." I stepped into her warm foyer and explained the situation. Martha's friendly expression hardened. "That is ridiculous. Tom and I love your bird bath. We have seen more bird activity in the past month than in the previous 5 years. Do you know how few water sources are available for birds in winter? That bird bath is a godsend for them. So you did not complain to the HOA? Absolutely not. In fact, I was thinking of getting one myself. She called to her husband, who was in the living room. Tom, come hear this nonsense. Tom Johnson appeared, equally appalled by the violation letter. He suggested I talk to more neighbors before responding to the HOA, and he promised to write a letter of support if I needed it. The Patels were similarly supportive. Priya Patel told me her kids loved watching the birds from their window, and that it had sparked an interest in nature for her 5-year-old daughter. Her husband Raj mentioned that bird baths were common in their old neighborhood, and he saw no issue with it. Encouraged, I spent the next hour walking the block. I spoke to 12 households total, and not a single one had a problem with my bird bath. In fact, most were enthusiastic about it. My neighbor 4 houses down, an elderly man named George Chen, was an amateur birder and had been documenting the species that visited my yard. He had photographed 17 different species using the bath, including a rare sighting of a hermit thrush. The next morning, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting. These gatherings were usually sparsely attended, with the same 5 or 6 busybodies showing up to discuss mailbox colors and garage door regulations. I had been to exactly 2 in 5 years. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived at 7 p.m., there were 8 other people present, including Patricia Brennan, who sat at the head of a folding table with papers organized in neat stacks before her. Patricia was exactly what central casting would send if you ordered a middle-aged HOA president. She was 52, had that precise helmet of highlighted blonde hair that never moved, wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt embroidered with the Meadowbrook Estates logo, and possessed the kind of tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Quentin," she said when she noticed me. "How nice of you to join us." "Patricia," I replied, taking a seat. The meeting began with the usual minutiae. There was discussion about replacing the entrance sign, debate over whether to allow a darker shade of gray for front doors, and a lengthy argument about whose responsibility it was to trim a tree branch that overhung 2 properties. Finally, 45 minutes in, Patricia turned to new business. "We have recently had to issue a violation notice to one of our residents regarding an unapproved bird bath," she announced, not looking at me. "This serves as a reminder that all exterior installations require Architectural Review Committee approval." I raised my hand. "I would like to address that." Patricia's smile tightened. "Mr. Keller, if you have concerns about your violation, you can submit a written appeal." "I am aware, but since I am here, I would like to understand the reasoning. A bird bath is a common lawn ornament. There are garden gnomes, flags, and decorative planters throughout this neighborhood, and I have never seen violation notices for those. Those items were either approved or grandfathered in." "Okay, so I am happy to apply for approval retroactively." Patricia shuffled her papers. "The Architectural Review Committee has already determined that heated bird baths pose concerns. They attract excessive wildlife." Define excessive. Excuse me. What level of wildlife is considered excessive? "I have spoken to my neighbors, and none of them have a problem with birds visiting my yard. In fact, they appreciate it." One of the other board members, a man named Frank Dietrich, who served as treasurer, chimed in. "Patricia, who actually complained about the bird bath." Patricia's expression flickered with annoyance. "That information is kept confidential to protect residents who may fear retaliation." "So someone did complain?" I asked. The HOA board has the authority to enforce violations whether or not a specific complaint is filed. We conduct regular neighborhood reviews. This was interesting. In other words, Patricia had likely been driving through the neighborhood, spotted my bird bath, and decided on her own that it was a problem. "I have a petition," I said, pulling out a folder from my bag. 12 households on my block have signed letters supporting the bird bath. I also have documentation from George Chen showing the positive impact on local bird populations, which is particularly important during winter months. I had spent the afternoon gathering these materials, and George had been more than happy to provide scientific backing for my cause. Patricia barely glanced at the papers. "That is very nice, Mr. Keller, but the rules are the rules. The CC and Articus are clear. Section 7.3 requires approval for decorative installations, which I acknowledge I should have obtained. I am requesting that approval now. Section 12.8 prohibits features that create nuisances for neighbors. I have demonstrated that my neighbors do not find this to be a nuisance. The interpretation of the CC and Articus is at the board's discretion. Then, I am formally requesting that the board exercise that discretion in favor of common sense." The room had gone quiet. The other attendees were watching this exchange with clear interest. Frank Dietrich was frowning at Patricia. "We will take your request under advisement," Patricia said in a tone that suggested the discussion was over. "The violation stands until a decision is made." "What is the timeline for that decision? These matters take time." "Several weeks, possibly months. And in the meantime, I am supposed to rack up $100 per day fines. You could remove the bird bath and avoid the fines entirely." I left the meeting frustrated but not defeated. Paula met me at my house afterward with Thai takeout and a sympathetic ear. "She is not going to budge," I said, stabbing at my pad thai. "This is a power trip for her. Then go over her head, file a formal appeal, talk to a lawyer if you have to." "For a bird bath, for the principal," Paula said firmly. "And because Patricia Brennan does not get to bully people just because she has a title." The next day, I drafted a formal appeal and submitted it to the HOA board. I also did some research into Patricia's tenure as president. What I found was enlightening. Over the past 3 years, violation notices had increased by 200% under her leadership. Multiple residents had complained on neighborhood forums about overzealous enforcement and inconsistent application of rules. There was even a Facebook group called Meadowbrook HOA Reform with 47 members, all sharing stories of ridiculous violations and arbitrary decisions. I joined the group and posted about my situation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of people chimed in with their own Patricia Brennan horror stories. One woman had been fined for having the wrong shade of mulch. A man had been cited for parking his truck in his own driveway because it was deemed a commercial vehicle, even though he used it for personal use, and it was a standard pickup. Another family had been threatened with legal action for painting their front door navy blue instead of the approved colonial blue, despite the colors being virtually identical. Reading these stories made me realize this was about more than just my bird bath. Patricia had created a climate of fear and frustration in the neighborhood, and people were fed up. I reached out to several of the group members and proposed we organize. If we could demonstrate a pattern of unreasonable enforcement, we might be able to challenge Patricia's leadership, or at least pressure the board to rein her in within a week. We had organized a neighborhood meeting at George Chen's house. 23 people showed up, far more than ever attended the official HOA meetings. The living room was packed, and the energy was electric. "I think we need to understand what we are dealing with," I said, standing near the fireplace. "Is this about changing specific rules, or is this about changing leadership?" A woman named Susan Valdez, who had been fined $2,000 for having a small vegetable garden in her backyard, spoke up. "It is about accountability. Patricia has turned this HOA into her personal fiefdom. She picks and chooses which rules to enforce and against whom." "Has anyone actually read the entire CC and Artiques?" George asked. "I did last night. There are some interesting provisions about board elections and recall procedures." This sparked a lengthy discussion. According to the governing documents, the board could be recalled through a petition process requiring signatures from 40% of households. Meadowbrook Estates had 212 homes, which meant we needed 85 signatures. "That is doable," Frank Dietrich said. He had shown up to the meeting, which surprised me. "I am on the board, but I did not sign up to be part of whatever Patricia is doing. She makes unilateral decisions and expects the rest of us to rubber stamp them. I will sign your petition." Having a sitting board member on our side was huge. Frank explained that Patricia often acted without consulting the other board members, including issuing violation notices and making enforcement decisions that should have required a vote. We spent the next 2 weeks gathering signatures. I created a simple petition explaining that we sought accountability and reasonable enforcement of neighborhood rules. Paula helped me canvass the neighborhood on weekends. George created a website documenting Patricia's most egregious violations and inconsistencies. The response was better than I had hoped. People were eager to sign. Many had been afraid to speak up individually, but seeing collective action made them brave. Within 12 days, we had 104 signatures, well over the required threshold. During this time, my bird bath remained in place, and no fines were actually assessed. I suspected Patricia realized that aggressively pursuing the matter would backfire, given the growing opposition to her leadership. On February 15th, we submitted the recall petition at the monthly HOA meeting. This time, the clubhouse was packed. 57 residents showed up, a record. Patricia's face went white when she saw the crowd. "We have a petition signed by 104 households calling for a recall election of the current board," I announced, handing her the thick stack of papers. "According to Article 9 of the governing documents, this requires you to schedule a special election within 30 days. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she took the petition. "This will need to be verified." Of course. We kept copies of everything. The room buzzed with conversation. Patricia tried to maintain control of the meeting, but it was clear she had lost the room. Multiple residents stood to share their experiences with unreasonable violations. Susan Valdez brought photographs of her vegetable garden, which was neat and attractive, explaining how she had been threatened with legal action over tomato plants. The man with the pickup truck, whose name was David Morrison, detailed how Patricia had harassed him for months over his vehicle. Frank Dietrich dropped a bombshell. "I want to state for the record that many of these violation notices were issued without board approval. As treasurer, I only learned about most of these when reviewing our financial records. Patricia has been acting unilaterally in many cases." "That is not true," Patricia snapped. "I have full authority as president to enforce the CC and Artiques." "You have authority to enforce rules," Frank corrected. "You do not have authority to interpret them however you want or to issue violations without board consultation, particularly in ambiguous cases." Another board member, a quiet woman named Helen Torres who served as secretary, raised her hand tentatively. "Frank is right. I have minutes from our meetings. Many of these enforcement actions were never discussed or voted on. Patricia's face had gone from white to red. "This is insubordination. This is transparency," Frank replied. "Something this board has been lacking." The meeting dissolved into chaos, with Patricia trying and failing to maintain order. Eventually, she stormed out, leaving the remaining board members to deal with the crowd. Frank took over, apologizing for the dysfunction and promising that the petition would be properly verified and an election scheduled. 3 days later, I received a certified letter. The recall petition had been verified, and a special election was scheduled for March 18th. In the meantime, the board had voted to suspend all pending enforcement actions, including the violation against my bird bath, until after the election. It felt like a victory, but I knew the real work was just beginning. We needed candidates to run against Patricia and her allies. We needed a platform, and we needed to make sure people actually showed up to vote. Paula and I sat at my kitchen table one evening, looking at my bird bath through the window. A pair of cardinals were splashing in the water, their red feathers brilliant against the gray February sky. "You know what is funny," Paula said. "This all started because you wanted to help some birds drink water in winter. I certainly did not expect it to become a whole thing. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest ripples." We organized a slate of candidates for the new board. Frank agreed to run for president. Susan Valdez, despite her earlier troubles, volunteered to run for a board position. We recruited 3 others: a retired lawyer named Mitchell Crane, a software engineer named Jennifer Wu, and a landscape architect named Robert Hayes. All had lived in Meadowbrook for years and were respected in the community. Our platform was simple: reasonable enforcement of rules, transparent decision-making, and fostering community rather than policing it. We created a simple website, distributed flyers, and organized coffee meetings where residents could meet the candidates. Patricia, meanwhile, went on the offensive. She sent out a mass mailing claiming the recall effort was being orchestrated by a small group of troublemakers who want to turn our beautiful neighborhood into chaos. She warned that, without strict enforcement, property values would plummet and the neighborhood would fall into disrepair. It was classic fear-mongering, but some people bought it. There was a contingent of residents, mostly older and more conservative, who appreciated Patricia's strict approach. They saw her as maintaining standards and keeping the neighborhood pristine. The campaign got nasty. Someone put signs in their yard supporting Patricia, so we made signs supporting the reform slate. Anonymous flyers started appearing, attacking Frank's financial management and claiming he had mishandled HOA funds. We discovered this was completely fabricated and tracked the flyers back to Patricia's printer based on a distinctive logo quirk. When we confronted her about it at a candidate forum, she denied everything, but the damage to her credibility was done. The morning of the election, March 18th, dawned cold and clear. Voting was held in the clubhouse from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Paula and I voted as soon as the polls opened, then spent the day doing last-minute outreach, reminding people to vote and offering rides to those who needed them. The turnout was remarkable. By 6 p.m., over 160 households had voted, more than 75% participation. The votes would be counted immediately after polls closed, with results announced by 9 p.m. Paula and I waited at my house with George, Susan, Frank, and about 15 others. We ordered pizza and tried to distract ourselves with small talk, but everyone kept checking their phones. At 8:45, Helen Torres called Frank. "We have the results," she said, her voice neutral. Frank put her on speaker. "Go ahead." For the position of board president, Frank Dietrich received 118 votes. Patricia Brennan received 41 votes. The room erupted in cheers. I felt a weight lift that I had not fully realized I was carrying. Frank was grinning, accepting congratulations and handshakes. Helen continued with the other results. All 5 reform candidates had won decisively. The board had been completely remade. Patricia requested a recount, which was her right, but it only confirmed the results. A week later, the new board held its first meeting. The atmosphere was completely different, collaborative, and focused on actual community building rather than enforcement. One of the first orders of business was reviewing the backlog of violation notices and appeals. My bird bath was approved unanimously, with Frank noting for the record that it enhanced the neighborhood and posed no legitimate nuisance. Susan's vegetable garden was also approved, and the board voted to revise the rules to explicitly allow backyard gardens. David Morrison's truck was deemed perfectly acceptable. The board also implemented new procedures requiring full board votes on enforcement actions, and created an appeals process with clear timelines and standards. They established office hours where residents could meet with board members to discuss concerns. They created a newsletter to improve communication. But the story did not end there. In early April, about 3 weeks after the election, I received a call from Frank. His voice was tight with concern. "Quentin, we have a situation. Can you come to the clubhouse?" "What kind of situation?" "I would rather explain in person. It is about Patricia." I drove over immediately. Frank, Helen, and Mitchell Crane, the retired lawyer who now served on the board, were waiting for me. They looked grim. "What is going on?" I asked. Mitchell spread some papers on the table. "We have been conducting an audit of the HOA finances. It is standard procedure after a board transition. We found some irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that involve missing money," Frank said. "About $47,000 missing." I sat down heavily. "You think Patricia stole from the HOA?" "We are not sure yet, but the numbers do not add up. There are expenses listed for maintenance and repairs that were never done, payments to vendors that we cannot verify. It is a mess." Mitchell continued, "As a lawyer, I have to advise that this needs to be reported to the police. If there is embezzlement involved, that is a criminal matter, but we wanted to talk to you first since you spearheaded the recall effort." "Why does my opinion matter?" "Because this is going to be very public and potentially ugly," Frank said. "Patricia still has supporters in the neighborhood. When this comes out, there will be people who think we are persecuting her. We want to make sure we handle this correctly." "If she stole money, she needs to be held accountable," I said. "That is not persecution, that is justice. Document everything and call the police." They did exactly that. Detective Sarah Mills from the Naperville Police Department took the case. The investigation took 6 weeks, during which the neighborhood buzzed with rumors and speculation. Patricia hired a lawyer and insisted she had done nothing wrong, but the evidence was damning. Detective Mills discovered that Patricia had created fake invoices for services never rendered, then deposited the HOA checks into accounts she controlled. She had been doing it for 2 years, taking money in small enough increments that it had not triggered immediate red flags. The total amount embezzled was actually $52,000 once everything was uncovered. On May 23rd, Patricia Brennan was arrested at her home and charged with felony embezzlement and fraud. The news made the local paper, complete with a photograph of her being led out in handcuffs. I felt no joy in seeing it, just a sad vindication. She had let power corrupt her, and now she would face the consequences. The legal process moved slowly. Patricia pleaded not guilty initially, but faced with overwhelming evidence, eventually accepted a plea deal in September. She pleaded guilty to felony theft and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to repay the full amount plus restitution costs. The neighborhood slowly healed. The new board worked to rebuild trust and refocus on community. They organized social events, a summer concert series, a Halloween parade for kids. They created a community garden where residents could tend plots together, with Susan Valdez managing the project. They established a fund for neighborhood improvements that was transparently managed and regularly audited. My bird bath remained a popular attraction. George Chen continued documenting the birds that visited, and his count eventually reached 31 different species. In April, he suggested we install more water sources throughout the neighborhood to create a bird-friendly corridor. The board loved the idea and approved a pilot program with 5 additional bird baths in common areas. Paula's school adopted our neighborhood as a field trip destination for nature studies. Several times that spring, I watched from my window as groups of elementary students, bundled in their bright jackets, sketched birds or took notes on behavior patterns. Paula always waved at me when they passed, her face bright with enthusiasm. One Saturday in June, the board organized a neighborhood block party. It was the first community event in years, and nearly everyone attended. There were grills smoking with burgers and hot dogs, kids running through sprinklers, music playing from someone's portable speakers. Frank gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and Patricia's prosecution. "We are not just a homeowners association," he said, standing on a small platform near the community pool. "We are a community. That means we look out for each other, we work together, and we remember that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around." What happened with Patricia was unfortunate, but it reminded us what matters: taking care of each other, creating a place where people want to live, not somewhere they are afraid to live. There was genuine applause. I stood with Paula, her hand in mine, and felt something I had not felt in months: contentment. This was what a neighborhood should feel like. George Chen approached us, holding a camera with a long lens. "Quentin, you have to see this." "I got the most incredible shot of a rose-breasted grosbeak at your bird bath this morning. They are rare in this area." He showed us the image on his camera's display. The bird was stunning, its crimson chest vivid against black and white plumage. "That is because of your bird bath," George said earnestly. "These water sources are making a real difference for local bird populations. You should feel proud." "It is just a bird bath," I said. "It is never just anything," Paula said, squeezing my hand. "You wanted to help and you did." Everything else followed from that. She was right, in a way. I had just wanted to give thirsty birds access to water during a cold winter. I never intended to start a movement or expose embezzlement or change the neighborhood's entire governance structure. But one thing led to another, and sometimes standing up for a small principle reveals larger problems that need addressing. That evening, as the sun set and the block party wound down, I sat on my front porch with Paula. The bird bath was visible from where we sat, still now in the fading light. A robin landed on its edge, dipped its beak, and drank deeply before flying off. "You regret any of it?" Paula asked. "All the stress and conflict," I thought about it honestly. The past 6 months had been intense. There had been moments of real anger and frustration. I had spent countless hours on something that should have been simple, but I also thought about the friendships I had made, the community that had come together, and the positive changes that had resulted. "No," I said finally. "I do not regret it." "Good." "Because I was thinking we should get a heated bird bath for my place too," I laughed. "Do you have an HOA?" "Nope, but it seems like the right thing to do." We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Across the street, the Johnsons were turning on their porch light. Next door, I could hear the Patel children laughing as they were called inside for bed. Normal evening sounds in a normal neighborhood. Except now, it felt like a neighborhood that belonged to the people who lived in it, not to someone else's arbitrary vision of perfection. The following week, the local news ran a feature story about our neighborhood transformation. The reporter, a young woman named Amanda Chen, coincidentally George's niece, interviewed several residents about the recall election and Patricia's arrest. But she also focused on the positive changes, the new sense of community, and the bird-friendly initiative. "It started with one man wanting to help birds in winter," she said in her report, "with footage of my bird bath and various species visiting it. But it became a story about neighbors coming together to reclaim their community from overzealous enforcement and, ultimately, criminal corruption." The story ran on the 6 o'clock news and was picked up by several local news outlets. My phone rang off the hook with interview requests. I declined most of them. This was not about me being some hero. It was about ordinary people standing up for reasonable treatment and common sense. However, I did agree to speak on a panel about HOA reform at a county meeting in August. The panel included representatives from several neighborhoods dealing with similar issues, a real estate attorney, and a state legislator who was drafting reform legislation. "The problem with many HOAs," the attorney explained, "is that they operate with minimal oversight and accountability. Board members often have significant power with little training or checks on that power. Combine that with vague rules that are open to interpretation, and you create opportunities for abuse." The state legislator, a woman named Representative Morrison, nodded. "That is why we are proposing legislation that would require HOAs to follow open meeting laws, provide clear appeals processes, and face penalties for arbitrary enforcement." What happened in Meadowbrook Estates is not unique. We hear stories like this regularly. I shared our experience, emphasizing how quickly things had escalated from a simple bird bath to uncovering embezzlement. "The bird bath was not the real issue," I explained. "It was the symptom of a larger problem. A board president who saw residents as subjects to be controlled rather than neighbors to be served. Once we started pushing back, everything else unraveled." After the panel, several people approached me with their own HOA horror stories. A man from Aurora had been fined for displaying an American flag improperly. A woman from Wheaton was being sued by her HOA for installing solar panels. A couple from Schaumburg had been cited for having a basketball hoop in their driveway. These conversations reinforced how common these problems were and how much people felt powerless against their HOAs. I exchanged contact information with several of them, offering to share our playbook for organizing and pushing back against unreasonable enforcement. In September, Patricia Brennan began serving her 18-month prison sentence. There was no dramatic confrontation or final showdown. She simply disappeared from the neighborhood, her house eventually sold by her family to cover legal costs and restitution payments. A young couple with a baby moved in, and within a week, they had installed a bird feeder in their front yard. I smiled when I noticed it. The new board continued making improvements. They hired a professional management company to handle administrative tasks and financial matters, with transparent reporting and regular audits. They created a reserve fund for major repairs and infrastructure improvements. They surveyed residents about priorities and concerns, actually listening to the feedback. By October, Meadowbrook Estates felt like a completely different place. The paranoia and fear that had characterized Patricia's tenure had been replaced with cooperation and mutual respect. People lingered to chat with neighbors. Kids played freely in yards without worry that they might violate some obscure rule. The neighborhood had become what it should have been all along, a pleasant place to live. George Chen published an article in a birding magazine about urban bird conservation, featuring our neighborhood's initiative as a case study. The article explained how simple interventions like heated bird baths and bird-friendly landscaping could support local bird populations, especially during winter months when natural water sources froze. He included beautiful photographs of the various species that had been documented at our water sources. The article caught the attention of the Audubon Society, which reached out about designating Meadowbrook Estates as a certified bird-friendly community. The board enthusiastically pursued this, and by November, we received the official designation. Signs were installed at the neighborhood entrances proclaiming our status, and we received a plaque to display at the clubhouse. The irony was not lost on anyone. The bird bath that Patricia had tried to ban had become the seed of something much larger, something that brought positive attention and pride to the neighborhood. Thanksgiving week, Frank organized a potluck at the clubhouse specifically to celebrate the community's transformation. Over 100 people attended, bringing dishes that reflected the neighborhood's diversity. Traditional turkey and stuffing alongside Indian samosas, Mexican tamales, Italian pasta dishes, Korean kimchi, and more. During the informal program, Frank asked me to say a few words. I reluctantly stood, uncomfortable being in the spotlight but recognizing the moment. This time last year, I was just a guy who felt bad for thirsty birds, I began, getting a laugh. I had no idea that buying a heated bird bath would lead to all of this. But here is what I learned. Communities are only as strong as their willingness to stand together. When we see something unfair or unreasonable, we have a choice. We can accept it and complain privately, or we can speak up and work together to change it. Everyone here made that second choice, and look what we built. I gestured around the crowded room. We exposed corruption. We changed leadership. We created policies that serve people instead of controlling them, and we built real community in the process. None of that would have happened if everyone had just stayed silent and accepted the status quo. So thank you. Thank you for signing petitions, for showing up to meetings, for voting, and for believing that things could be better. The applause was warm and genuine. Paula, sitting at a table near the front, was wiping her eyes and smiling. Susan Valdez gave me a thumbs up. George Chen raised his glass in a toast. As I sat back down, Martha Johnson, my neighbor with the binoculars, leaned over from the next table. You know what the best part is? I saw 5 different bird species at your bath just this morning, including a pileated woodpecker in November. That never would have happened without you. Without all of us, I corrected. Sure, she said, but you started it. Never underestimate the power of one person doing the right thing. December brought cold weather and holiday preparations. The neighborhood looked festive with tasteful decorations, and notably, there were no violation notices about displays being too early or too elaborate. The new board's approach was simple. As long as decorations were safe and not genuinely offensive, people could celebrate however they wanted. On Christmas Eve, I was surprised by a knock on my door. I opened it to find a group of 8 neighbors standing on my porch, holding thermoses and wearing winter coats. George Chen stood at the front. We are doing a bird-watching walk, he announced. Starting at your bird bath, then making a loop through the neighborhood to check all the water sources. Want to join? Paula was visiting family in Iowa, so I grabbed my coat and joined them. The group included the Johnsons, the Patels with their kids bundled in snowsuits, George, Susan Valdez, and a few others I knew by sight but not well. We walked slowly through the quiet neighborhood as dusk fell. At each bird bath, George would point out tracks in the snow or droppings that indicated which species had visited. At one common area bath, we actually witnessed a small flock of juncos taking turns drinking and bathing, their dark feathers stark against the snow. "This is what community looks like," Tom Johnson said quietly as we watched the birds. "Not perfect lawns and identical mailboxes. This. People together, appreciating something simple and good." We finished the walk as full darkness arrived, everyone's breath steaming in the cold air. As the group dispersed to their homes, I felt profound gratitude. Not just for the successful fight against Patricia's unreasonable enforcement, but for the real relationships that had formed in the process. The new year arrived with fresh snow and renewed energy. The board announced plans for several initiatives: a community garden expansion, a neighborhood directory to help people connect, monthly social events, and a mentorship program pairing new residents with established ones to help them feel welcome. In January, exactly 1 year after receiving that fateful violation letter, I stood at my kitchen window with my morning coffee, watching the birds at my heated bird bath. A pair of cardinals, brilliant red against white snow, were bathing together. A blue jay waited impatiently on a nearby branch. Sparrows hopped around the base, pecking at seeds that had fallen from a feeder. My phone buzzed with a text from Paula. "Morning, want to grab dinner tonight? I have news." I replied yes and spent the day working from home, periodically glancing out at the bird bath. Around noon, I noticed Martha Johnson on her front porch, binoculars raised, watching something in my yard. I waved and she waved back enthusiastically. That evening at dinner, Paula told me her news. She had been offered a promotion to assistant principal at her school. It meant more money and responsibility, but also longer hours and more stress. She was torn about whether to accept. "What does your gut say?" I asked. "That I should do it, but I am scared." "Of what?" "Failure, making hard decisions, dealing with angry parents and bureaucracy." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You know what I learned this year? Sometimes the right thing to do is scary and difficult and comes with conflict, but you do it anyway because it matters. You will be a great assistant principal because you actually care about kids and doing right by them." She smiled. "When did you become so wise?" "When I bought a bird bath and accidentally started a revolution." She laughed. "Fair point." Paula accepted the promotion, and we celebrated by getting takeout from our favorite Thai place and watching old movies on my couch. It was simple and perfect, like the best moments usually are. February brought a special board meeting to discuss the anniversary of the recall election. Frank proposed throwing a 1-year celebration, but several board members pushed back, worried it might seem like gloating or keeping old wounds open. "I disagree," Susan Valdez said. "We should acknowledge what happened, both the problems and how we address them. It is part of our neighborhood's history now. Pretending it did not happen does not help anyone." After discussion, they compromised on a low-key community gathering with a historical element. They created a display at the clubhouse, documenting the timeline of events, from the initial violation letter through the recall election, investigation, and reforms that followed. The display was factual and non-inflammatory, focusing on process and outcomes rather than personal attacks. The gathering in March was well attended. People examined the display with interest, many sharing their own stories and perspectives. There was genuine healing in the open acknowledgement of what had happened. Patricia's name was not mentioned prominently, but her actions were documented as a cautionary tale about the importance of accountability and oversight. Several people who had been her supporters attended and participated in discussions about moving forward. I supported Patricia initially, one older man admitted during the open forum. I thought she was maintaining standards. I did not realize how far she had gone until the financial investigation. I am sorry I did not speak up sooner. His honesty was appreciated and reciprocated by others. The event became less about celebration and more about reflection and community building. Spring arrived, and with it, an explosion of bird activity. The migration season brought new species through the neighborhood. George documented warblers, thrushes, and even a scarlet tanager at various water sources. His species count for the neighborhood reached 48 different birds, an impressive number for a suburban area. The community garden flourished. Susan oversaw the installation of additional plots, and a waiting list developed for people wanting space. The garden became a social hub where neighbors worked side by side, sharing tips and produce. In May, I received an unexpected email from a woman in Colorado named Jennifer Phillips. She had read about our story online and was dealing with a similar situation in her HOA. Could I talk with her about our experience and offer advice? I called her that evening. Her story was depressingly familiar. An overzealous board member, arbitrary enforcement of vague rules, and residents too intimidated to push back. I spent an hour walking her through our process, from gathering neighbor support to organizing formally to filing the recall petition. The key is documentation, I emphasized. Keep records of everything. Get things in writing. Build a coalition before going public, and find allies wherever you can, even on the board itself if possible. Jennifer thanked me profusely. It helps to know it is possible. That ordinary people can push back and win. You can, I assured her, but be prepared for it to be difficult. Change always is. Over the following months, I spoke with residents from 7 different states dealing with HOA problems. Each story was unique in its details, but similar in its core issues: unaccountable leadership, vague rules, and lack of resident power. I shared our experience freely, hoping it might help others avoid some of the pitfalls we had encountered. In June, Representative Morrison's HOA reform legislation passed the Illinois House and Senate. Governor Pritzker signed it into law in July. The legislation required HOAs to follow open meeting laws, provide clear appeals processes with timelines, conduct annual audits by independent accountants, and face penalties for violations of these requirements. This is because of communities like yours speaking up, Representative Morrison told me when I called to congratulate her. Your story was part of my testimony. Real examples of real problems help legislators understand why reform is needed. The new law went into effect January 1st of the following year. Our HOA was already in compliance, but thousands of others across Illinois would now have to change their practices. Paula and I got engaged that August. I proposed at the community garden during a summer evening potluck, surrounded by neighbors and friends who had become like family. Martha Johnson cried. George Chen took approximately 200 photographs. Frank opened champagne. It was exactly right. Planning the wedding gave us something happy to focus on, though we kept it simple. We decided on a spring wedding at a small venue in downtown Naperville, with a reception at the neighborhood clubhouse. The board waived the rental fee as an engagement present, which touched us both. Patricia Brennan was released from prison in October, having served 15 months with time off for good behavior. She moved out of state to live with relatives in Missouri. I felt no animosity toward her at that point, just hope that she had learned something from the experience and would make better choices going forward. The neighborhood continued to thrive. Property values, despite Patricia's dire warnings, had actually increased. The bird-friendly designation and strong sense of community made Meadowbrook Estates desirable. Houses sold quickly when they came on the market, often to families attracted by the neighborhood's reputation. My bird bath, the little stone basin that started everything, continued its daily service. Through summer heat and winter cold, it provided water to countless birds. It had become something of a neighborhood landmark. New residents would ask about the famous bird bath, and the story would be retold. Paula and I married the following April on a perfect spring day. During the reception at the clubhouse, Frank gave a toast that brought down the house. I first met Quentin when he showed up at an HOA meeting to fight for his bird bath, Frank said, grinning. I thought he was either crazy or remarkably stubborn. Turns out he was both in the best possible way. He saw something unfair and decided to do something about it. That decision changed this entire neighborhood for the better. So here is to Quentin and Paula. May your marriage be filled with the same courage, principle, and care for others that Quentin showed when he refused to remove that damn bird bath. Everyone raised their glasses, laughing and cheering. Paula kissed me, and I felt overwhelmingly fortunate. We honeymooned in Maine, exploring rocky coastlines and quaint coastal towns. It was wonderful to unplug and focus solely on each other. But I found myself noticing the birds wherever we went, pointing out species to Paula, who indulged my newfound interest with patient amusement. George has created a monster, she teased when I got excited about spotting a common eider duck. I just appreciate them more now, I defended myself. Is that so wrong? Not at all. It is actually kind of cute. We returned home to find that George had installed a webcam focused on my bird bath, streaming live footage to a neighborhood website. People love watching it, he explained. It is peaceful and educational. I hope you do not mind. I did not mind at all. The webcam became surprisingly popular, not just in the neighborhood but beyond. George submitted the stream to birding websites, and soon people from around the country were watching Meadowbrook birds go about their daily routines. The viewer count sometimes exceeded 500 people simultaneously. Paula moved into my house officially that summer. We combined our belongings, painted some rooms, and made the space ours together. Her favorite spot became the breakfast nook, where she could sip coffee and watch the bird bath activity every morning before heading to school. I never get tired of it, she said one Saturday morning, watching a family of house finches take turns bathing. There is something so pure about it. They are just living their lives, doing what they need to do, not worried about anything else. Must be nice, I said, thinking about work stress and mortgage payments and all the human complications of modern life. We can learn from them, Paula said. Focus on what matters. Take care of yourself and your flock. Appreciate simple pleasures. She was right, as usual. The second anniversary of the recall election passed with minimal fanfare. The neighborhood had moved beyond that chapter, though its effects remained. The board continued functioning transparently and effectively. Community events were well attended. The garden and bird-friendly initiatives flourished. In September, George Chen published a book about urban birding, featuring an entire chapter about Meadowbrook Estates. The book included stunning photographs of the various species that visited our neighborhood, along with practical advice for creating bird-friendly spaces in suburban environments. He dedicated the book, to Quentin Keller, who reminded us that small acts of kindness can create ripples of change. I bought 20 copies to give as gifts. Paula bought her school a copy for the library, and it became popular with students interested in nature and science. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I worked. Paula thrived in her new administrative role. We spent evenings and weekends with friends and neighbors, and through it all, the bird bath remained a constant presence. A simple stone basin with heated water, still doing exactly what I had intended when I bought it, providing birds with access to water during cold weather. But it had become more than that. It had become a symbol of standing up for what is right, of neighbors coming together, of positive change being possible when people decide to act rather than accept. Every new resident who moved to Meadowbrook heard the story eventually, and many of them mentioned it as part of why they had chosen our neighborhood. We wanted somewhere with real community, a young couple told me when they moved in down the block. Not just people who happen to live near each other. Your bird bath story showed us this place has that. 3 years after the initial violation letter, on a cold January morning that could have been the same as when this all started, I stood at my kitchen window with coffee, watching a cardinal drink from my bird bath. Paula stood beside me, her hand resting on her slightly swollen belly. We were expecting our first child in June. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. How different things could have been. If I had just removed the bird bath like Patricia wanted, if I had not pushed back. But you did push back. Yeah, I did. And because you did, we have all this. She gestured broadly, encompassing not just the bird bath but the whole neighborhood beyond. Community, friends, a place we actually want to raise our child. I put my arm around her. You are right. I guess sometimes being stubborn about the right things leads to good outcomes. Sometimes, she agreed. And sometimes it just means you are stubborn. The trick is knowing the difference. We watched the cardinal fly away, replaced by a pair of chickadees. The heated water steamed slightly in the cold air. My phone buzzed with a notification from the bird bath webcam site. Current viewers, 612. People around the country starting their mornings by watching birds in Naperville, Illinois, go about their business. It was a strange legacy for a $200 purchase made on impulse because I felt bad for thirsty birds. But I would not change any of it. The conflict, the stress, the countless hours spent organizing and fighting and pushing for change, all of it had been worth it. Because at the end of the day, it was never really about the bird bath at all. It was about the principle that people should not be bullied or controlled unnecessarily, that rules should serve communities rather than the other way around, and that ordinary people have the power to create change when they work together. Patricia Brennan had tried to ban my heated bird bath. Instead, she had accidentally sparked something much larger. My neighbors had thanked me for attracting wildlife, but really, they had thanked me for standing up and giving voice to frustrations many of them shared but had been afraid to express. The birds kept coming, winter after winter, spring, summer, and fall. They drank and bathed and lived their simple bird lives, unaware of the human drama that had swirled around their water source. And that was exactly as it should be. They were just birds, after all, doing what birds do. But for the humans of Meadowbrook Estates, that bird bath represented something more. It represented the moment when a community decided it had had enough of unreasonable authority and chose to fight back. It represented transparency over secrecy, cooperation over control, and community over compliance. Years later, when our daughter was old enough to understand, we would tell her the story of the bird bath that changed the neighborhood. We would teach her that standing up for what is right matters, even when the issue seems small. We would show her that regular people, working together, have far more power than they often realize. But that was for the future. On this January morning, Paula and I simply stood together, watching birds, grateful for warmth and home and community, grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought us here. A journey that began with a simple desire to help thirsty birds in winter and ended up changing everything.